Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into the architecture of breakthrough. We're going to look at exactly how we reframe our identity and push past our own resistance. So let's just jump right in. Why is lasting change so incredibly difficult? It's literally a universal experience, right? We set a goal, we get that initial burst of motivation, and then bam, we hit a brick wall. We just feel completely stuck. Well, to understand how to actually break free from that gravity, we're looking at the raw documentation from the June 2026 ROFA sessions. This gives us an inside look at how real, lasting change is engineered under some of the absolute toughest circumstances imaginable. We're going to be digging into two super powerful sessions today, one driven by raw emotional reframing and the other by rigorous cognitive strategy. To really ground us in the true stakes of making a change, listen to this incredible insight from Valerie. She's the facilitator of the first ROFA session we're exploring. While sharing her own harrowing origin story with her group, she says, "I was born addicted. It made me feel like a burden and also be grateful." Valerie was actually sold on the black market as an infant. She carried this profound childhood wound, constantly being told she didn't have to be taken in by anyone. And wow, this really establishes the deep psychological stakes of change, doesn't it? It's not just about wanting something different in life. It's about untangling these heavy, incredibly complicated narratives we've been fed about our own worth since literally day one. Valerie maps this all out brilliantly in her session notes. She introduces this concept of self-inventory, and she connects it directly to burden and gratitude. She's telling her group that before you can even think about changing your behavior, you have to audit your internal narrative. You literally have to sit with that intense friction, that feeling of carrying a massive childhood burden, right alongside this profound gratitude just to have survived it all. And here's the kicker. It's precisely inside that tension where you actually find the fuel for real transformation. Confronting these deep-seated wounds isn't just some exercise in looking backward or, wallowing in the past. This process of self-inventory acts as the ultimate emotional catalyst for your personal growth. Valerie explains that recognizing the sheer volume of blows you've taken from life and realizing you are still standing, well, that's the ultimate proof of your resilience. The trauma doesn't just leave a scar, it forges this undeniable, ironclad determination to survive. Once you realize how much you've already made it through, suddenly the obstacles standing in front of your current goals look a whole lot more manageable. And that brings us to the real turning point of Valerie's session. You absolutely have to make a critical identity reframe. Think about the default trauma-informed state of saying, "I am a burden." Behavioral change is completely impossible if you stay stuck there. You have to flip the script. You have to move to a state of absolute empowerment and declare, "I am a masterpiece." Valerie teaches that the moment you identify that childhood lie, it just stops controlling you. This isn't just some toxic positivity or wishful thinking. It's a complete architectural teardown and rebuild of your self-worth. You are literally replacing a self-limiting belief with an undeniable fact of your own value. Now, once you actually adopt that masterpiece identity, you start escaping self-limitation in a big way. Valerie shares some amazing anecdotes with her group to prove this. For instance, she talks about being asked to teach returning citizens how to write a business plan, even though she had zero business degree herself. She just stepped up and said yes, and one of her students from that very class went on to become a film producer. No way, right? She also reminds the room that Colonel Sanders didn't even start his global chicken empire until he was 60. But honestly, the most powerful example is her mentee. This was a woman who sat in an unauthorized area of a jail for 3.5 years waiting for trial. During that time, she wrote Valerie a toothpaste letter talking about feeling barren her entire life, but finally finding purpose and self-love. True growth completely ignores the limits and timelines we impose on ourselves. Shifting gears into Chris's framework, we can start to see how all of this builds directly into the second ROFA session. We're essentially moving from Valerie's emotional why into Chris's structural how. While Valerie really brought the inspiration and that huge identity reframe, Chris steps in with the operational roadmap. He relies heavily on the trans-theoretical model of behavioral change. He's breaking down exactly how a person moves from being stuck to taking real action, ensuring that your emotional breakthrough actually translates into tangible, real-world results. Chris walks his group through the first 3 stages of change. First up is pre-contemplation. That's when you're just dissatisfied, you're tired of how things are, but you aren't really ready to make a move yet. Then comes contemplation. Okay, the problems are real, and you know deep down something's got to give. But we are going to land really heavily here on step 3, preparation. Chris emphasizes over and over that this is the stage where your success or failure is actually determined. If you just jump straight from thinking about changing right into taking action without preparing, you are inevitably going to fail the second things get tough. Preparation really is the unglamorous linchpin of the whole transformation process. And this crucial point boils down to a really fascinating psychological tool Chris inherited from his dad. The saying goes, prepare for everything, worry about nothing. Think about it. If you actively anticipate the obstacles, if you map out exactly what's going to go wrong and have a plan ready for it, you completely neutralize the anxiety of the unknown. Sure, the unexpected is still going to happen, but because you've already prepared for everything else, you actually have the mental bandwidth to handle whatever surprise comes your way.
This brings us to a concept Chris introduces to the group called the decisional balance matrix. Honestly, just think of it like a cognitive audit. It's a Socratic tool designed to ruthlessly audit our personal excuses and reframe our resistance. You see, when we're trying to decide whether or not to change, our brains naturally want to weigh the benefits against the costs. But Chris does something different. He actually forces his group to interrogate whether the costs they're coming up with are actual costs or if they're just sophisticated lies we tell ourselves to avoid doing the hard work.
So Chris throws a standard list of pros and cons out there for a simple scenario, just attending a group session. On the pro side, people say things like learning something new, building a community, and achieving better life outcomes. Makes total sense. On the con side, the group starts shouting out real, tangible challenges, transportation issues, the fear of wasting their time, and then finally someone says, well, it's easier to do nothing. And notice how that last item sits firmly in the cons column, because that is exactly how our brains naturally categorize it. But right there, Chris stops the room. He challenges their assumptions entirely and asks, is easier actually a cost? Seriously, is doing nothing genuinely a penalty or a drawback to your life? Really think about that for a second. When we say it's easier not to do it, we're using that as an excuse to stay in bed, or to skip the workout, or not apply for the job, right? We label the sheer ease of staying exactly where we are as a con of making a change. But is it really? Here is the brilliant paradigm shift. Easier is actually a benefit of staying stagnant. It is not a con of changing. You literally have to take easier completely off your cons list. It's not a real drawback, it's just comfortable. And removing it strips away those fake excuses and forces immense, inescapable personal accountability. Because the real con isn't that it's easier to stay home. The real con is simply that the work required to change is hard. And hard work, that's just a price you have to be willing to pay.
This realization leads to a much deeper auditing of your true cons. Chris asks the room to look closely at their lists and ask themselves, does making this change physically hurt you? If not, why are you calling it a con? Are you literally cheating yourself out of growth by listing fake excuses? And incredibly, someone in the session brings up the very real fear that attending the group might trigger past trauma. But Chris pushes back again. Is processing hard feelings actually a bad thing? Confronting those actual costs, like the really difficult feelings that bubble up when processing trauma, can actually become a massive benefit, because working through them is what ultimately leads to long-term peace. Just like that, a con transforms into a pro.
Now, if you happen to be in a position of leadership and you're helping someone else audit these cons, you have to understand that you cannot force the timeline. There is a massive, fundamental difference between dragging someone from pre-contemplation straight into action versus meeting them exactly where they are. Chris explicitly states that if he tries to force someone into action before they've mentally prepared, they aren't the ones failing. He is failing them as a leader. True guidance absolutely requires empathy and patience with the structural stages of change. To really bring this theory to life, Chris shares a harrowing real-world example that happened just the night before. An unhoused man in their community was violently assaulted by a group. His initial completely understandable instinct was to go grab a weapon and react out of pure anger. But because he had been taught this exact model, he actively used the preparation stage while in the middle of a crisis. He paused before reacting. He consulted Chris for a second opinion. He then systematically documented the incident, getting 911 records, pulling hospital reports, and only then did he act with clear strategic intention. That right there is the absolute power of preparation, saving a life in real time. Okay, so let's pull all of this together. The core message of this explainer, and of these two incredible ROFA sessions, is that true transformation is really a two-part architecture. First, it requires the heart's emotional reframing. You have to do the self-inventory and move from seeing yourself as a burden to adopting that masterpiece identity, exactly like Valerie taught. But secondly, it requires the head's logical scaffolding. You need rigorous cognitive preparation and an honest auditing of your own resistance, just like Chris laid out. You simply can't just pick one. You absolutely need both the emotional why and the strategic how. I want to leave you with a final thought to take with you, applying this decisional balance directly to your own life today. Think about that one area where you've been feeling stuck, that place where you've been using it's easier as an excuse not to move forward. Step fully into your masterpiece identity, completely strip away those fake cons, and ask yourself right now, what will you prepare for this week? take that one concrete step. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.